Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I know it's Friday, but thank you for attending one of our last Científico Latino GSMI webinars. As with all of our other GSMI webinars, we strongly encourage you to open up the Q&A, send us your questions and thoughts throughout the panel. And this is really meant to be interactive. So we want you guys to use this time to ask us questions, and we'll all, someone will respond, get your questions answered. So I'm just going to first introduce myself. My name is Denisha. I am one of the GSMI webinar coordinators. I'm a fourth year neuroscience graduate student at the University of Rochester. And I was previously a post-bac student before I went to graduate school at Oregon Health Science University. And I'll be moderating this session with Daisy. Daisy, can you wave? Daisy, she's the other GSMI webinar director, and she'll be making sure all of your questions are addressed throughout the webinar. Daisy's awesome. So today we have two expert speakers with us. First, we have Dr. Daniel Starr, who is the current NIH-PREP director at UC Davis. And we also have our very own Aníbal Tornés Blanco, a fellow CL member, and he's a fourth year biological chemistry PhD candidate at the University of Michigan, and was also previously an NIH-PREP post-bac at Case Western Reserve University. So I'm going to welcome our two speakers, who will go ahead and give us an overview of post-bac NIH-PREP programs in the biosciences.
Cool. Well, really, thank you so much, Denisha and Daisy. All right. So this is a bit more of a blurb of who I am. As Denisha mentioned, I'm a fourth year biochem PhD student at UMich. Before getting here, I was an undergrad at University of Puerto Rico, where I majored in biology, and I actually had a lot of summers of research under my belt before applying to grad school. However, when I applied to grad school for the first time, I didn't get in, and therefore I actually decided to join a prep program to actually keep trying to get into grad school. And so you'll learn a little bit more about why prep was so important and how it can be really important for you. As the difference between 2018 and 2019, my application was the same 10 programs I applied to, except 1 year I got into no programs, and then year after I got into all of them. So I think it's really important to understand how big of a difference just a 1 year research experience can actually make in your application. And thank you for being here. So let's get started with Dr. Daniel Starr.
Hi, you guys can call me Dan. I'm a professor at UC Davis, and I've been at UC Davis for 20 years. And I don't know if it's useful about going over where I've been and how I got here, but I think what's useful is for me to admit that I am a white, straight male who grew up in suburban Minneapolis with educated upper middle class parents. So I benefited a lot from privilege. I got the very most expensive educations you can imagine at Colby College and a PhD at Cornell. And I own up and accept that these doors were held open for me, and I had to work to get through them, but I benefited from privilege, and many of you haven't had the same privilege as me. And so I still don't totally understand the difference, but I know there's a huge difference. And I've become more and more aware of the difference as I work with students like yourselves over the last 20 years, because there's a lot of students like you at UC Davis. And it has just made me aware of how much privilege I had. And what it's done is all my service activities now are designed to try to give you some small part of that privilege that I benefited from. So everything that I'm doing is not for me, it's to give a little bit of privilege to those that didn't have the privilege I had, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my history and why I'm here. So I thought I would start out by this little exercise here, because I think if we're going to talk about post-bacs with the goal of going to a PhD program, I just want to give you what I think is a really good analogy of what doing a PhD is. Okay, so what is a PhD? So this circle represents all of human knowledge, everything that we know, all our history and everything that we know today is contained within this circle. And next slide, this circle is what we all learned in kindergarten. We all learned the same things in kindergarten. We learned this core of human knowledge, and as a child, what we needed to learn to function in this world. And as we moved to elementary school and high school, the circle gets a little bit bigger, and it's the same circle for everybody. But then as we start getting into college and we start specializing, and we all became biologists of some points, we're starting to get out here at the edge of this circle where we're really become quite specialized. So hang on the slide for a second. We've become quite specialized, and now as you're a senior or junior in your college courses, you're really learning the newest stuff, the stuff that's been discovered in the last couple of years about your field. But remember, there's a lot of white space that you don't know anything about, but you're specializing in this red phase. Now, if we zoom in on this area, right, you're right at the edge of human knowledge. Okay, so now what's a PhD? A PhD is expanding the bubble. So next slide, that's a PhD. That's you pushing on the frontier of human knowledge and pushing it forward and actually learning something new. And that's really hard. And it takes a lot of commitment and a lot of work, but it's also exhilarating because now you're in that little bubble. You're the only person in the world that knows that knowledge. And now you're going to share it with everybody else in the world. You've added to human knowledge. And that's a unique thing that you can do in a PhD that most other people don't ever have the opportunity to do. So the next slide. So that's your PhD. Next slide. Okay, this is when you're in your PhD program. This is what it feels like. This is your world. Your whole world is in that red zone, and you're trying to push on this big black wall. It's really hard, but yet it's exhilarating. So the next slide. But remember, you just made that little blip, and it's important, but lots of other people are doing important stuff too, and try to keep in perspective what you're doing. And so next slide. The goal is, keep pushing. Okay, so if this sounds like something, can you back a slide for a second before we get into this? If this sounds like something you want to do, that pushing to learn new human knowledge, then the PhD is the right thing for you to do. If this doesn't sound like something you want to do, then you should think about a different career, because doing a PhD is all about the research and learning new human knowledge, and you're gaining lots of skills while you do that. And those skills are incredibly marketable to a wide variety of careers. But if that doesn't sound fun and exhilarating to you, you're not going to like grad school. Okay, so let's just keep on moving forward. You're ready to go to grad school. So the next slide. Are you ready to get into a PhD program? Have you honestly sat down? So like Aníbal tried a year too early. He got rejected from everywhere he applied. Okay, so are you ready now to apply? And you probably already made this decision last month because the deadlines were December 1st. And this is pretty rough, I would say. In order to get into a PhD program, you need, lots of places have these 3.0 cutoff, and they just don't even look below 3.0. We could talk about whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, but that's just a fact. A lot of schools do that. So you need above a 3.0. You don't need a 3.8. Okay, so you don't need to have all A's. You don't need to have what you need to get into medical school. You can have a significantly lower GPA than your colleagues that are going to medical school. Now, if you're below a 3.0, you need to somehow fix that. And that's really hard to do in a post-bac program like the programs we're going to be talking about today. The programs we're going to be talking about today are designed to get you research experience. They're not going to fix your GPA. So if you have a GPA that's significantly below 3.0, you should look for something different, like a master's program where you can prove you get a fresh start and prove you can do the coursework. A lot of our students did courses as a master's, got a good GPA as a master's student, then went into a PhD program. So think about what you need to fix, what you need to strengthen in order to do well in a PhD program. And if it's just research experience, then these post-bac programs are the right place. But if it's GPA, you should look into a master's program. So the next bullet point is the research experience. That's the most important thing to get into a PhD program. It's the thing that when I'm looking at an application, it's the first thing I look at. Do they have some research experience? And it doesn't have to be a ton, though the more the better. But especially if you're from a school where there weren't a lot of research opportunities, did you take advantage of the opportunities that were available to you? Did you go spend a summer somewhere else at a more research-intensive institution and take advantage of a program that was available to you? Did you take advantage of the research opportunities? Or were you at a big, huge R1, a big, huge institution that focuses on research and you didn't take advantage of it, you didn't do any research? That's not going to look good. And it turns out that those that took advantage of the research opportunities that were available to them, they do better in graduate school. And GPA and GRE scores, which we don't do anymore, there's no more GRE scores, thank God, but GPA is entirely not predictive as to how you're going to do or what university you went to. Totally unpredictable of how you're going to do in grad school. The only thing that's predictive is, to me, is, you know, how you did in that research experience, which usually isn't graded, right? And then the other thing you need for a PhD, which I've already sort of mentioned, is you need that passion and that drive for discovering new knowledge. And if you don't have that, you're not going to have fun in graduate school. If you have that, graduate school can be the best time of your life. It can be a total blast. Okay, next slide. So after you did that, maybe you're like, I'm close, I want to do a PhD, but I'm not quite ready. Maybe I need a little more research experience or a little more confidence because I'm just not ready to go into that first year of PhD, and I'm not gonna succeed there. Okay, so if you're close, like Aníbal was close last year, or the first year he applied, he was confident enough to apply, but it didn't work out. But in 1 year, actually in like 6 months, is all the time because July 1st to December 1st, the program made him from 0 for 10 to 10 for 10. So he did most of that. The program just pushed him over the top. So he was close. So you have to do an honest assessment. Are you close, but not right? And that's the ideal student for these post-bac programs. I don't want the 3.9 GPA student with 3 years of research experience. I'm like, just go straight to grad school. Don't waste a spot in my post-bac program. I want people in my post-bac program that didn't get in last year, and with our help, I know we'll get in next year. So it's a very small window. We can't help fix other things. And if you're already better than that, we don't want you. We don't want to pad our program with students that are ready to go to grad school. We want to make fundamental changes in your life by pushing you over that last little hump to get you into the grad school your dream. And then more importantly, once you get there, to succeed when you're there. Okay. I'm not sure what I have next. Yeah, does anyone have questions at this time or before we go on?
I have a question for you. So let's say, what if a student has little prior research experience, has a low GPA, but also comes from like a low income, background. And so I saw that from the earlier slide, you recommended do like a master's program, but in that kind of scenario for that kind of background for that student, what would you recommend them?
So there are some master programs that really cater to students like that and have lots of scholarships. The one that I'm most familiar with and I love is the master's program at San Francisco State University, California State University, San Francisco. They have an amazing master's program in molecular biology. We take students in our PhD program from that program all the time. And there's other ones across the country. I wouldn't pay for a master's degree. Look for programs that will support you and will provide fellowships. But when you're looking at a master's program, you got to be careful. You got to find one that's aiming at research, and you're probably better off at a less well-known university. If you go to a big, huge research university like UC Davis, I'm spending all my time with my PhD students. I'm not spending the appropriate amount of time with my master's students. If you go to California State University of San Francisco, they don't have PhD students. So the master's student there is top, and the professors spend a lot of time with those master's students, and they get really good educations. And I'll take those master's students and then bring them to do a PhD in my program. So when you're picking a master's program or any program, don't pick the name. Okay, don't pick the name of the university. Like your parents are going to want you to go to the really famous university. That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for the university where you're going to be the most important student around, and the faculty are going to spend a lot of time with you to move your career forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
So I think that's a great segue into my next point. Focusing on this later part, there's this dramatic change between one year and the next, and the fact that you have some research under your belt will be extremely important. And it has become increasingly important as, for example, metrics like the GRE have been removed, as now programs need to weigh other things a little more, and research will always be priority. So this is a moment to think about, if you have a clear why, you can handle anyhow. So if you really want to get to grad school, you can handle anything that comes your way to get there. And hopefully it's a mindset that will help you keep going, as it did for me. This is kind of what my path was like, but there's many other paths that you can follow. I went for my bachelor's. I wanted to pursue grad school. I had the prereqs with the research, and I thought it was competitive. So I went and applied to grad school. However, I didn't get in, got rejected. So I did a post-bac, and then I reapplied. And then everything worked out. Now, it's important to understand that even though you may have some challenges getting to grad school, things don't magically become functional when you get to grad school. Even when you get to grad school, you will have situations where you have very solid plans, and you know what you want to do. But then as you're going through the process, you're like, oh, wait, let me look for alternatives and even become a baker. So I guess in a way, things change. It's worth mentioning that even when I got to grad school, I was like, yes, I got here. In my second year, my PI left the institution, and I was given the choice to go with them, but I decided to stay at University of Michigan. And so what does that tell you? Anything can happen, and there's many situations that just can't happen, which what ultimately needs to drive you is your energy and passions for science, as just Dan said, which is why making a clear and internal evaluation about why you want to do a PhD is the most important thing you can do at this stage. Now, what is a post-bac program? Post-bac just means post-bachelor's, and it's a program that you will do after your bachelor's degree. And the differences will only be that some post-bac programs are internally funded by institutions, whereas other post-bac programs are externally funded by the NIH. And most of the time, these post-bac programs that are internally funded actually are intending to get funding from the NIH to run actually the PrEP program, which is the program that I did and the one that Dan runs. So the post-bac experience has many different components. The first one should be, I remember asking you why you're pursuing this, and it could be limited research opportunities that you may have had in your undergrad. In my experience, what happened was that I had 3 different experiences, but none of them were longitudinal enough. So what really helped in that PrEP program was having a long-term research experience where I actually could develop a project from A to C, more organized than what I could do in a summer rotation and a research intensive institution. So this is a great opportunity to enhance your research experience and improve your credentials. Now, if you're, let's say, coming from a psychology background, but you're interested in neuroscience, this could also be a really great opportunity for you, as you will be able to kind of grasp some of that research experience that we do in in neuroscience field, and be able to actually apply it to your psychology background, which is can be really powerful in many cases. Another thing is that these programs will allow you to present posters and or even publish a paper depending on when you get to the program. You may be able to retake undergrad courses, but this will depend on the program because you can actually also take graduate level courses. So not every program supports these two. They're sometimes more focused on the research or on other types of professional development activities. So there's actually a list we'll link later at the seminar that actually lets you know whether these programs allow for courses or they don't. So at the end of the day, this is a simulated graduate student experience is how I like to think about it. You really are thinking every day like an independent scientist. You develop everything that they want at the PhD level, which is critical planning, executing, and communication skills. And it's worth mentioning that even though I left communication skills to the end, coming from Puerto Rico to Case Western, where I did my post-bac, I had to rewire myself in a way because I had to learn how to communicate my science in English. In Puerto Rico, I would just talk in Spanish with the professors and let them know about my ideas. But when I came to the mainland, I realized that, wait, I'm not used to thinking in English science all the time. Even the acronyms are different in many ways. And so it's a reality check that I had, which you can actually also plan for if you do these programs. And finally, figure out whether grad school is right for you. Now, the timeline of a post-bac program may be a little stressful because applications start opening up January, sometimes February, and go up till April. But then the program will begin in August. So it's a very fast, you applied, you got an interview, get ready, we're gonna start in August. So it can be a stressful couple of months, especially if you're relocating. So just be aware of that process. And then the program will end maybe around May or June of the following year. However, it's worth mentioning that some post-bac programs will allow you to extend your stay. Let's say you did everything, you had your research, you had everything you thought you needed, but for some reason, your dream school or target school, you didn't get into that one or actually any school. Well, in those situations, there are programs that will support you for another year. Those are PhD-oriented post-bac programs. Now, it's worth mentioning that with not with every, but most NIH post-bac programs, they do have slots for MD PhD applicants. It may be 1 or 2 slots, but out of, let's say, 8 slots they have every year, they will take 1 student maybe that will be around for 2 years, and they will be able to apply for their MD PhD, which is a slightly different application cycle and a lot of different requirements, including the MCAT preparation. Now, we have a lot of resources in Científico Latino that over the years we've been compiling and centralizing so all of you can access them. All of these links will be provided with the slides, but actually we have, well, now there's about 51 post-bac programs in the NIH. We have another set of databases for post-bac programs that are internally funded, which you can find on this guide that was developed by Jessica Santana, a team member. And so in this guide, which I'm showing down here, there's a lot of different components, such as the overview and even to resources, which we'll go over today. We go over the timelines and just how the programming looks like, and the types of post-bac programs, be it the PrEP one, which is NIH funded, independent ones, and other alternatives for other STEM-like disciplines. Now, before I continue, how do I choose a post-bac program? I think there's a Q&A. I'm not sure if we want to get to right now. Okay, so Maria Lopez is asking, after completing a post-bac, will you receive any credentials like a certificate? And so I don't know if Dan, if your post-bac program provides any certificates.
I mean, most of them won't, because most of these post-bac programs, you're actually an employee and not a student, considered an employee by the institution. That has benefits and drawbacks. The big benefit is benefits. You usually get way better benefits as an employee: medical, vision, dental. And you don't have to go to the student health clinic. You can go to a real clinic. And more pay and vacation time and things like that. So you're usually going to be an employee. I think the certificate is the experience itself. You have this experience, and especially with prep programs, everybody across the country now knows that's basically a certificate. I am a prep scholar. That's your certificate. It's not a formal thing, but everybody knows who the prep scholars are. I get dozens of emails every year from institutions all across the country begging me to tell my prep students to go to their schools because they know how well trained the prep scholars are at the end of that year. So in a way, yes, that's your certificate. You are a prep scholar.
Yep. And just to go further with that, prep programs are not degree granting. So if a program asks you for, let's say, transcripts from an institution, sometimes they will require you from a degree granting institution. And know that prep programs are not that. So that's important to also understand. But if you took some graduate level coursework and you want it like certified in your new institution, that could be something that you can like talk individually with the core curriculum at your PhD school. So let's go with a visualization exercise, continuing to remember our why. So when you're applying to prep programs, you need to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Well, and what do you want to get out of this? There's a lot of faculty at the institutions you will apply and you'll get in, but you need to really think about what you want out of this year. When I was thinking about my prep program, I found Dr. Jason Mears at Case Western. He was working with mitochondrial fission proteins that are called DRP1s, and it was doing structural biology. And I had some experience in computational biology, had some experience in microbiology, and I thought, well, I could maybe apply some of these principles that I learned into something a little bigger and much more fun, which is structural biology. And so it's really important to think about what you want as you're applying for these programs, because when you get to these programs, you will likely have to have had 3 professors that you are interested in working with and explaining your application why you're interested in working with them. Because the timeline, as I mentioned, is pretty packed with a lot of events. So some programs don't even allow for rotations. Actually, the program I did in Case Western, where I did my prep program, we only got like 2 days of rotation in the lab. So it was like a really fast speed dating exercise where you would really just get the vibe of the lab. And so knowing what the lab is doing ahead of time will help in this process as well. And so it's important to understand that. Now, these are other considerations when choosing a post-bac program. If you're interested in coursework, Dan mentioned they're not meant for like retaking and upping your GPA, but if you may need it, then there may be opportunities. National conferences are a big event that happens from here. And actually, I was recruited to Michigan at ABRCAMS while presenting my post-bac research. And it's actually like a very cyclical process. You start your post-bac, you go to ABRCAMS, you get fee waivers if you're in a prep program already, the prep program will pay for your application fees most of the time. And so it's important, though, that some schools, it's not about the fee waivers, but it's about the vibe check. So you're able to go to these conferences and actually talk to the booths of like students and faculty from these places you want to apply to and which you'll likely be applying to soon. And so the thing is, you can really get a good idea of how they're like, their community, and even if it's in a very conference heavy environment, it's a great opportunity to present your work and also network. And it's one of the biggest things I like to think about from my prep program. You also can receive standardized testing preparation. As Dan mentioned, the GRE is slowly trickling down. I feel like it's already trickled down pretty much. So most programs around the country are not requiring it. It's crazy to think that maybe 7 years ago, only like 10 programs were not requiring it. And now it's over 400, I believe. But there is a database to consider if you really are thinking of applying to grad school. Just make sure the programs you're interested in are drop the GRE, or if you need it. And the other test that you couldn't get you can get support from your program, your prep program, is the TOEFL, which is a test of English as a foreign language. Some schools, for example, don't understand that Puerto Rico has two primary languages, English and Spanish. And so some programs will think that you need to take the TOEFL where others don't. And so it's important to also check out this database that I've maintained to be able to know if you need the exam or not. Because it is a financial compromise unless you're in a prep program where you get the support to actually get the training for the exam and even take the exam. As Dan mentioned, there's actually really good benefits as an employee, such as the goods. Well, it's mostly a salary, really, and then health, vision, and dental insurance. But it will vary if the program is internally funded or externally funded. And lastly, there will be a lot of professional development for graduate school application support, such as weekly meetings with program directors and your PIs. For some of you, it might be the first time having to meet weekly with someone that you really need who needs support to grow your project. Work on your personal statements a lot, get feedback for your CV, and do mock interviews. So during the prep program, I actually gave it's 75% research, and here are some pictures of my time there. I work with this amazing group in the Mears lab where we study the mitochondrial fission event. I have a lot of nice memes about what gives people power, which is mitochondria. And so this is also the ABRCAMS celebrating pretty much all our success, just being there and presenting our work with my fellow peers. And the thing is, since the prep program is really trying to make you grow as a researcher, I actually even managed to go out to talk with my directors and go back to Puerto Rico and actually finish some collaborations that I left in my undergrad institution to actually launch a rocket into space with my former institution. And I, under the idea that I'll continue growing as a researcher, they allowed for this. And so if you still have like unfinished business, you still want to get through, it may be a possibility, and at least it was for me. So yeah, this was an incredible enriching experience. And the thing about it is that there's a lot of these programs, and so it's like kind of the paradox of choice. So you have a lot of options. Now you need to dissect which ones you want to go, and consider things even as the weather. Like, are you okay living in a new environment where the weather is dramatically different, being away from family? But there's many options these days. So there's actually 51 post-bac programs that are externally funded by the NIH. And so these hyperlinks will lead you to the institutions that are providing these programs. And this link will be pretty important as prep programs are meant for students from diverse backgrounds according to NIH standards. And this will vary across the board. They support ethnic minorities, visible and invisible diversities, and the definitions for how NIH defines diverse backgrounds will be an important criteria for being able to be eligible for these programs. And so that's important, and it's really mostly research and 25% skill development, I like to say. But if you give an extra 10% for your future self, you will also be happy and give yourself a pat on the back to your past self. So with that being said, I just want to make a quick stop and see if there's any outstanding questions.
I actually have several questions from, so I'm in the Kleski lab at Yale, and there is a current prep scholar who is doing a lot of sectioning, IF staining right now. And so she actually has several questions. And so I think that, well, she also asked, when she was applying, how is it that one actually chooses where they want to do a prep program in terms of, all these slight nuances, let's say between UC Davis, UMich, and Yale. And so how are you able to parse out, if location wasn't a factor, they would just, given that they're only going to be relocating for a year, and she really wants to pursue neuroscience. And so would you heavily consider let's say, oh, which school is like the strongest per se, you know, in terms of neuroscience, and would they just go there? Or yeah, or is it, you know, the priority more of like, okay, well, maybe UC Davis has several like more professional development opportunities, and so I'll go there instead. Yeah, if that makes sense.
I think that's a great question. I think there's a lot of ways to answer it. The first thing I would say is this is a 1-year thing, so I actually encourage you to step out of your comfort zone and go try a different part of the country. So like this year, we have a couple students from the South, from the Carolinas, who decide, oh, I'm going to go to California for a year. And they're really enjoying their time here, but they're mostly applying to schools back in the South for graduate school because they've decided, okay, I did the California thing for a year. So, and it's a much shorter commitment than coming out here for 5 years to do your PhD, right? And then they decided, I don't want to be away from my family or whatever. So you can be away from your family for a year, go across the country, check out a different environment. So I highly suggest that because it's only a 1-year commitment. The next thing I want to say is the thing you shouldn't be choosing on is based on the name of the school. Yale's a great institution. There's a lot of amazing things at Yale, but don't go there because it's Yale and you think that's going to help you. It's not going to help you any more than going to Case Western, which maybe a lot of people in the audience haven't heard of. If you're not from Ohio or the Midwest, right? So it doesn't matter which of these 51 institutions you do your prep program in, you are going to be a prep alum. And so yes, what you were saying, Daisy, is if there's like a cluster of faculty that are in the prep program, remember the faculty that are chosen for prep programs, they've been hand chosen because they're good mentors, right? And it's not the whole list at that institution. That we're hand choosing good mentors. And so if there's like 4 or 5 people you're really excited about, and when you're looking through their list, that's the school you should be applying for. It should be what gets you most excited scientifically. And each prep program is a little bit different. Like also some sort of specialize in fields. Like there are some that are a little more neuro-oriented, or some that do more MD PhDs, and some that are more like disease clinical versus mine's very basic molecular cell biology. If you really want to study a disease, that's a whole nother conversation, but you might not like Davis as much as some of the other places. So the feel of the list of faculty and what they're doing, which one makes you the most excited, I would say be what drives me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Dan said, and I do think that one of the big things is that you're gonna get so much out of this, and one of the you should never play the numbers game. But for example, some programs have 11 slots, other programs have 8 slots, and so in a way, if you want to think about this like strategically, which is a way that I kind of did it, I thought, well, maybe if the program is smaller, that means there's more attention to the students. That could be a flip of a coin assumption, to be honest. But it's kind of a way that I like navigated the decision. And I also was in a place where I didn't think I would need to go to a prep program. So I really was, after I got rejected, I was like, wait, I need a plan B. And Case Western was the first like program I saw. And so I think it's amazing when students know that they need that prep program and they can think about their options. But personally, it wasn't my experience. So yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think there needs to be a lot more exposure of what these prep programs are offering for students to be able to, yep.
The other thing I would add to that is if you want to do a PhD versus an MD PhD, those are 2 very, very different things. We don't take MD PhDs in my prep program because I've learned you can't mentor them at the same time. You can't mentor somebody that wants to do a PhD versus somebody who wants to do an MD PhD at the same time in one program. It's too hard to do. So I would focus on the programs that are focusing on the mentoring activities that are best for what you want to do in your career and what you want to do in grad school. If you want to go to neurobiology and you want to do a straight PhD, go to a prep program that specializes in neurobiology and placing people in PhDs.
Right. So I'd like to introduce Dan again. He's going to talk a little bit about the application and some of the qualifications that you will need for.
So these are going to vary a little bit from program to program, but I'll just give you an example based on the UC Davis prep. But all these things are, and at the end, we're going to show you a site. There's this one guy at MD Anderson in Dallas who has accumulated, has surveyed all the prep things and accumulated them into a giant Excel spreadsheet that will be really valuable for you. Okay. So my program requires a GPA of at least 3.0 to get in. And that's just because we found, again, if you're below that or significantly below that, you're going to have problems getting into a PhD program. You should probably do a master's program first, or else you're going to need something to make up for that lower GPA. And we can't really provide that in the 1 year at our thing. If you're going to go to ones that are funded solely by the NIH, you need to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident of the U.S. Of course, that includes Puerto Ricans. That's just the rule from NIH. Some programs will have like a little bit of matching funds. Like I've been working really, really hard to try to get DACA students into this. It's hard because the money is set aside for certain things. So some programs UC Davis is nowhere near as good as I wish we were. But some programs like have a slot for DACA students. And some programs just get the whole DACA thing. Other programs like DACA, no, and they run away. So it's if there's anyone in the audience that pertains to. So that would be the one exception to U.S. citizens. You might be able to, as a DACA, but that's changing so fast, as we all know, too. It's just a mess. You have to fit for the NIH. You have to fit the NIH definition, as Annabelle was already describing. It's on the NIH website. And it's on most of these prep websites. They're very specific now. It's African American, Latinx, Native American, or Hawaiian Pacific Islander. Or if you're white, disabled, or white or Asian, disabled, or otherwise disadvantaged. And otherwise disadvantaged is actually a very long list. And it includes socioeconomic status. So if you were a foster child, you qualify. Usually you have to have like 2 things on this list. But things on that list is like you qualified for free lunches in high school, or you qualified for food stamps, things like that. If you have 2 of those, you qualify for prep programs. So it's actually probably many more people than they realize qualify for these prep programs. My program, well, back one slide. My program wants you to have some research experience. And by what I mean by that is it really depends on where you came from. If you came from a place with a ton of opportunities, I want to see that you took advantage of them. And if you came from a place that has no research, a regional university or something that has no research, a lot of significant research going on, that maybe you did a summer internship somewhere, or you looked for something. So it doesn't have to be very much, but it has to be tried. And then you just have to convince us in this statement of purpose that you are really committed to doing a PhD. And many prep programs, the prep programs, in order for us to get renewed, the NIH says we want them to go into PhD or MD PhD programs. If a prep scholar goes into an MD program, that's going to make it harder for us to renew our grant. So we look very carefully to eliminate people that are interested in MD programs. So if you say you're interested in an MD PhD program and you have a GPA of 3.1, I know you're never going to get into an MD PhD program. So if I'm looking at your application and I'm like, well, what are they going to do? Are they going to do MD or PhD? They could probably get into either one. And if they don't convince me that it's PhD, then I'm going to be like, they're an MD risk, and I won't be able. First of all, I can't mention them for MD because that's not what our program is designed for, and it'll make it harder for me to renew it because the NIH doesn't want this mechanism to be funding MD students. There are a lot of other mechanisms for MD paths. So go do all those other, there's many, many more paths for MD post-bacs. So we're trying to eliminate the MD post-bacs.
Great.
Okay. Was there a question here, or should I keep going, or?
So I guess there's a one question. So from Andrea Lopez, she says, "Hi, I'm from Puerto Rico, about to graduate on May. Will also finish my participation on the Talks MSDT program, and I'm terrified since I feel like I don't have enough experience to be accepted into grad school directly. My interest is applying to grad school, specifically in environmental toxicology. I'm mostly regarding if the program provides funding for the lodging and other expenses during the year."
Yeah, that's a great question. You sound like an excellent candidate for post-bacs in general. Now, toxicology is a gray area for the NIH. So some NIH programs will be more open to you versus others where they want you to be doing basic biomedical work, but lots of times toxicology can fit under the NIH. So you're going to want to look through the faculty to make sure there's toxicology faculty on that list. But all these programs provide a stipend that you should be able to live on. The idea is that you can live on the stipend with the benefits without having to go back to family or friends, that you can do it on your own. So the stipends vary a lot from site to site. Of course, the cost of living varies a lot from site to site. And the stipends are always changing, so that website can be a little out of date. But we're usually paying them about the same or a little bit more than we would pay a graduate student. So I think UC Davis is up to around 37, 38, 39,000 for maybe 40,000 for this role for a year. So it's enough for you to live. You're not going to save money. You're not going to be able to buy a nice car. You're not going to be able to send money home. But you should be able to live on that stipend. That's what it's designed for.
Yep, I can speak for the Midwest at least. So in Case Western in Ohio, it was about 27,000, and I'm pretty sure here in Michigan it's around that 30K range. Cost of living is also very different, as Dan just mentioned, so that's why they adjust those. But definitely, just the fact that you get like insurance, for example, and getting like faculty level insurance or like employee level insurance can be very big. I have friends that had medical emergencies and they had to go to ER and only paid $100 in their ER just because of how good the insurance was. So in a way, the salary and the balancing with the insurance and like benefits will be important to consider. But yes, it's definitely livable. So, all right. So no more Q&A yet, Dan. So
okay. So the application. Our applications, I think, are due at February 15th, but it's a wide variety from early February to April for these programs. So there's no one date like graduate school. We put it at February 15th with the idea that people who applied for graduate school in December and got rejected have plenty of time to apply for this prep program. So if you applied in December and are afraid you're going to get rejected, you have plenty of time to apply for a prep program. Our application requires a statement of purpose, like a 2 to 3 page written research experience. This is going to vary a little bit, but everybody wants to see something written. And then everybody's going to want some letters of recommendation. And the letter of recommendation I'm looking for the most is the one where you did that research experience. I want them to say that you're ready for this and that you're committed to doing a PhD. We want to see your transcripts. Most of us will accept unofficial copies of your transcripts. Mostly we just want to make sure you've been taking the right courses. You don't have too many holes, because again, we can't fix those holes. If you haven't taken any upper level biology classes and you want to go do a PhD in biology, we can't do that in the time that you're in our prep program. And then we want to see, Annabelle's mentioned this, but we want to see that you've looked through the list of faculty and you've identified some that you're particularly interested in. So list the faculty. We take some UC Davis students, but we try to not take too many UC Davis students. And if we do, they can't stay in their lab. So that's just a technicality that we've come up with. Next slide. Do you want to do this one?
You can go for it.
Okay, so how do you decide? I think we've been talking about this a lot, but this is that Excel spreadsheet that I forget the professor's name, and MD Anderson, who put this all together. There's now, I think, 51 or 52 things on here, and you can see it's got, the salaries could be out of date, but somebody was asking about the salaries. They're like between 27 and 39.5, 40,000. Courses. So I think my prep program will cover one course at a time. In the fall, we have a special course for the prep scholars that we invite a few undergrads to, and it's all about scientific communication. We practice elevator talks, we practice grant writing, and we write grants for the NSF, and then we practice interviewing so that you're ready to interview in the wintertime. So it's all about communication. Done in the wintertime, most of my prep scholars will take an upper level UC Davis undergraduate course in some topic that they didn't have as an undergrad themselves. That might fill in a small hole so that they're ready for graduate school, or the ones that have just taken all the classes and are ready for graduate school might take a graduate level class. And then they can do the same thing in the spring quarter. We're on a quarter system. They can do the same thing in the spring quarter, and we pay the tuition for that one course from the prep thing. And you can see most of these prep programs allow you to take a course, and most of them are covering the tuition. Almost all, looks like everybody gives you funds to attend a conference. I would say 3/4 of these programs take the scholars to the ABRCAMS meeting, which is a phenomenal meeting. It is so fun. And to me, the most fun part of ABRCAMS every year is when all the prep scholars from across the country come together in one room the first night, and we have 200 prep scholars in one room yelling and screaming, and it's just a beautiful thing. It's so fun. Most of them don't have relocation funds because it turns out universities make it really hard to give those things out because you're employees, and universities don't tend to give employees relocation funds. Many of them say they don't have minimum GPAs. I don't know if I totally believe that. Again, I think if you're down around 2.7, 2.5, that you're not the right person for prep. You're much better off being in a master's program. You can get to a PhD program that way. It's a different route. Okay. The application deadline, some of them have rolling admissions, but they start some as early as January 31st here, right? A lot of them start in the summertime, and they're usually 12-month programs, but some are 9 or 10-month programs. The 12-month program makes it a little easier if you sign a year lease, right? I don't remember what else is on this list, but I think some of these things on the list were like, do you take MD students? Do you specialize in a certain thing? Because some of the prep programs specialize more than the other prep programs do. But this can be a really useful website, and you'll all get the link to this.
Yep. And there's definitely things that are not on the list as well. And then you just get a certain awareness as you go. So when I got to grad school, one of the first grants that they asked us to submit was the NSF. It's a grant that is only like 2 pages long, like a personal and a research statement, and it's relatively short compared to all the other grants that you're going to have to apply for, which are 6 or 60 pages long. So this NSF grant, you can actually apply for it during your post-bac program, and then you can apply for it. If you didn't get it that year, you can apply for it in your PhD, but you can only apply for it once during your PhD. So knowing, for example, that some programs actually want you to submit an NSF, you may recognize that it may be stressful. You need to write a lot. You need to get a lot of like document. Like it's not a big application either, but there's like requirements you need to fill out. But the idea is that some of these programs are helping you do that type of like state grants, but others are not really considering that as part of the criteria for the year. So yeah,
my program is a firm believer in having the prep scholars write an NSF grant. I think it's the most important thing we do all year long, because it trains you, not whether or not you get it. It's cool if you get it. If you don't, that's fine too. It's just that it trains you. And to me, the goal of prep is not to get you into graduate school. The goal of prep is to get you so you can succeed once you get into graduate school. Okay, you don't need too much help to get into graduate school. A lot of people can help you get into graduate school, but are you going to succeed in that first year and beyond in graduate school? And our goal of prep is to give you the skills, the soft skills you need to survive. I think somebody said it earlier, the prep is like a dry run for your first year of grad school. And you can make mistakes in prep because you've got all this wonderful support and you've got this network in this community, and it's okay if you make mistakes and screw up, and then you can start over or whatever. But your first year of grad school, it's like, and it's also like a lot faster than we go in prep. So prep, think of prep as a dry run so you can be successful in grad school. We actually get renewed. The two metrics that NIH wants to know is what percentage of your prep scholars got into grad school, and then what percentage finished grad school with PhDs. That's what they're renewing you based on. Long term, are your prep scholars getting PhDs?
Yep. And so I think that's really a great way to conclude this seminar and actually bring on any outstanding questions that anyone might have. So this is the last slide, and we'll be providing all of this slide deck to everyone that assisted, and you'll be able to watch the recordings on YouTube as well. So I don't know if there's any outstanding questions that we want to get to.
I have one question that I have been asked individually. And it's pertinent for students whose like college experience has primarily been like COVID impacted. So let's say they entered 2019 and then 2020, 2021, right? And then 2022, they graduate. And so this is a question in regards to like the letters of recommendation. So Dan, you said that you wrote on this slide that at least 2 should be from science faculty. And so for someone who hasn't had, let's say like in-person, like wet lab, experience. And so, should one of them be research experience like focus, or could, for example, like 3 of them just be from like science faculty, and maybe one of them you did really well at in like a lab course or something? And so what advice do you have for someone whose research experience is extremely limited in that regard, and they're struggling to find?
I think it's okay that your research, that some people have some very limited research experiences given the events of the last 4 years. And we are totally, last year, we were totally aware of that. And the last couple of years, there's been far less experience. And this year it's starting to tick up again now because people have been able to get experience. So we are completely, all prep programs, they're the type of people that are going to be aware of this. But if you're running a prep program, you're also going to be aware of that and understanding. So don't let that not let you apply. Just, COVID was a real thing. Just say COVID, I didn't get any research experience. That's why I need to go to prep before I go to graduate school. Now, as far as who writes the letters, I mean, ultimately the people that know you the best. And, you can't change who knows you at this point in time. Just get the people that know you the best and describe why maybe COVID in your statement, maybe why COVID made it so you just don't know people as well as you want to, but convince us that you're still committed to going to grad school and that you really need prep because of COVID.
So then are some factors in the application like maybe weighted a little bit more than like the LORs? So let's say like would the personal statement be weighted just slightly more?
Well, let me put it this way. In the last couple of years, the number of prep institutions has gone up because NIH is committed to this idea. So it's probably gone up 25% in the last 3 or 4 years. The number of applicants has plummeted because of COVID. Okay. So whereas before COVID, my program would have 75 applicants and we'd maybe, we're aiming for a class of 6. So maybe we'd eventually put out 10 or 12 offers. The last couple of years, we have we've had very few applicants, and most of them that met certain bars got offers to come to Davis. They're the last 2 years, there have been many prep programs emailing everybody. We have a listserv of prep directors. It's like, yeah, I don't have enough applicants. There are literally prep programs that don't have enough applicants the last 2 years. It is easier to get into prep than you think. So we've been saying all these bars, but I don't want to scare anybody away from applying for prep, because there's something like 250 spots across the country this year. There might only be 300 or 350 people applying for those 250 spots. This is not only 5% of you are going to get this. Most of you are going to, if you have above a 3.0 GPA and you have a teeny bit of research and you are committed to going to grad school, you're probably going to get into a prep. Okay, it's easier than you think.
And that should be the motto for everything. I think like for CL, our motto is if you don't apply, the probability of you getting it is actually going to be 0. But if you apply, that's going to be above that. So for sure, shoot your shot. Shoot your shot. Yep.
Yeah.
I have a question as well. I was wondering if you guys can speak on the best way to make the post-bac as most impactful as you can. So for me, when I think about my post-bac experience, I wasn't just only in a lab, I was also attending courses with other actual grad students at the time. And I was also involved in a lot of different on-campus organizations and stuff. So I was just wondering if you guys had any advice for how students can take advantage of the post-bac and have the most impactful experience.
I mean, I'm like, network with as many people as you can, because these people that you're networking with now, you're going to keep bumping into them throughout your whole career. And that's going to be helpful at every step of your career to have this network, especially, remember, there's 250 prep scholars across the country each year. Networking with that group, you're all going to be moving up through the ranks together. And there's something that Annabelle said earlier about how prep is sort of like, at the end of the year prep, you're going to know if you want to go to grad school or not. So talking to not just the grad students in your lab, but the grad students on your floor and the labs next door, and networking with them and getting to know them really well, getting to know as many grad students around as you can. But ultimately it's about research. PhD is about research. The more effort you put into the research in the lab, the more you're going to get out of it.
And personally, I think what guided me the most during my prep program was that why question, and really like recognizing a lot of things in myself as a scientist that I didn't previously have, I guess, according to like the admissions committees, as I was like rejected, right? So getting back from that was really big. But the way that I did that was by, you need to write personal statements and research statements for grad schools. And it's a big process of you going back and forth with a community of peers that may be in the same position you are. And so I think the biggest thing you can take out of prep is really that time of like reflection and just like continue doing research that's really like powerful, and and getting the most out of it. So I went back and forth a lot with my statements, and I think that back and forth with many peers was really helpful in many ways, because it made me really think deeply about where I was and where I wanted to get to. So it is a transition year, I think it's a great time to think about many things. And so, yeah, I'm definitely networking.
The other thing you're building that year is your self-identity as a scientist. You're really changing from a student to a scientist in that year. Most of them come in as a student. They want to know, what do I need to know for the exam? When they leave, they're a scientist and they're asking science questions. So that leads to confidence, that fights imposter syndrome that we all suffer with, getting you the skills you need to fight imposter syndrome when you go to grad school, to know you have the identity of a scientist when you get to grad school.
So I see a question in the Q&A. It's the one from Doris. It's about, would you advise post-bac to an international student, since most of these are directed to US citizens? And I guess I'd like to, maybe Tanisha, I don't know if you're comfortable, but I know you did the prep program from OHSU. which Jessica was part of too. And so I don't know if that program, when you did it, had evolved to only to be an official prep, or if it was still in its post-bac stages, where taking other international students.
Yes, I do think last I heard, they were in the process of trying to get funding. So that can be another thing for some post-bac programs. Not all are going to fall under the NIH or PrEP category, but they'll still so some of them, my advice would be email the program director, because some of them do have like reserve pools, as in they get donations from other sources. And so they will be able to take international students. So sometimes they'll say no, but sometimes if you are accepted, they'll try to work with you and find funding for you. So some programs, it doesn't hurt to reach out and ask if they accept international students or have funding for international students. So my suggestion would just be send an email and ask if it's not explicitly on their website that they don't take international students.
Yeah, and I following that up, in graduate school and higher education, funding feels like funny money. Like money is like distributed weirdly across many places, and you'll be surprised at how many like mechanisms there are to support like international scholars. And there's actually ways in University of Michigan that I've heard it has been done, where you would have an international applicant apply, and then a subdivision within the institution kind of like fills in the money pot so that that student can be taken up for a specific program. And so there are mechanisms. I think in that scenario, you really just want to be like the best applicant possible and really showcase that this is the program you need and this is why you need it, before actually like starting your process of emailing and asking about the eligibility issues. So, yep.
The other idea for international students is, the University of Michigan and the University of California, Davis, we have duties and obligations to our taxpayers, right? So we have colors of money that we just have to use for our taxpayers and our stakeholders. But the private institutions, they don't really care as much if it's a US citizen or international student. So oftentimes you can make a lot more progress at the private institutions. And a lot of these, especially these richer private institutions, they might set aside money for a spot in these programs specifically for international students. So they're a place like going to Hopkins or Yale and checking into their prep programs that might be worthwhile. But you're right. There's no doubt it's definitely harder as an international student, and I wish it wasn't.
So yeah. Okay, so there's like one more question in the Q&A. I think this kind of refers back to, what we've been saying, the post-bac / prep program, attending 1 or 2 years of this is kind of analogous to, right, doing that dry run of the first year of PhD. And so this question comes from someone in the audience. So what are some of the common mistakes? So I remember this might be referring to what we were mentioning, Dan, about making some mistakes in like your post-bac and it being okay. And so like what are some of the common mistakes students make in the, I would say, I think earlier stages of grad school that would lead them to not succeed in grad school?
This is an amazing question. This is a really, really good question. And I would go back to the very beginning of what I said, and it is, what is grad school? What is getting a PhD, and why do you want to do it? And what I kept saying there was, grad school is finding new knowledge for humankind, which means working at the bench, failing at the bench, failing before you get a success, right? So how the most common mistake I see young graduate students or even older graduate students making is they lose priorities. Okay, the priority has to be research in order to get a good PhD. If your priority is getting A's in all your classes, or being the most awesome TA that this undergraduate has ever had, that's a mistake. Okay, you can get some B's in your classes. You can do an okay job as a TA. You don't need to be the best TA in the world. You do need to excel at research in order to push that frontier of human knowledge forward. And that's where you're getting all the skills that people want to hire PhDs for. It's because they were able to do all the troubleshooting and the thinking, whether or not you go on to research or whatever with your PhD, the skills that the employers are looking for are the skills you got doing the research and analyzing the research and communicating the research. So as long as you're focused on pushing the research forward, you're going to be okay. If you start focusing on, a lot of times, students from underrepresented groups spend a lot of effort trying to help future students. That's commendable. That's great. I'm glad you're doing this. But the most important thing you can do to increase diversity in the academy is to succeed wildly at your research.
I was just gonna say that. Yeah.
Then you're going to
Get
be
your
in a
PhD.
position later on, you'll be in a position where you can make real change at the academy. Okay, so what you all are doing here for this society is amazing. But as I'm saying right here, it's taking you away from your research. So if you do this in limited amounts of time, that's great. And if it's not affecting your research, that's great. But if you're, I mean, this is an amazing society you guys have built. But it's not on you. You can't change it. You can only change yourself, then be in a position of power, then you can make fundamental change at the academy, which we desperately need. So I really appreciate what you're all doing. So, but it's not on you. It's got to be on the old white guys. I mean, not all of us are going to do it, but at least some of us are trying.
I was gonna say the same thing. I think like what I often find is, you know, some of like the more senior like the CL team members taking on way too much. One of them being the co-founders actually, and he just was like, look, I have to step away a little bit because I had to write my dissertation to defend, you know, to actually graduate. And so now, I mean, he has a PhD, he's a postdoc at Columbia, right? And Rob Fernandez, who's incredible. And yeah, so the biggest impact is you making it, getting a PhD and setting yourself up as an example for, yeah, the future generation. So yeah, you hit it spot on. Dan.
When you all are in a classroom in front of 200 students, you're gonna, that alone will make a bigger impact than anything you can do as a grad student.
Yep.
So we want you all to succeed wildly.
Thank you.
How do you deal with burnout?
I think, yeah, that's a big question, and I think we need another hour to discuss it. I guess it does. I did want to point out that on this previous topic we're chatting about, many times as we're doing these initiatives, we're also getting burned out by doing them, and so it's like a cycle of us wanting to help the future generation, but also burning out while we're doing this, and then having to continue with the research. So, truth is, burnout is not a stagnant moment. It's a process. So just recognize burnout as a spectrum and as like a street that you need to keep walking, and there will be bumps, but later on it's going to be flatter. So dealing with burnout, there's many mechanisms, and the best suggestions I can make you is, before setting up your rotations, set up your appointments with a therapist, wherever you end up with, as that was my first step when I got to Michigan, and it's been wildly helpful to actually have an extra support system even outside my lab and my PI and my peers. So yeah, but yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to comment or we want to jump to the next question.
You have to take care of yourself. You have to exercise. You have to eat well, or you can't help anybody else. And I sometimes, even at this age, I still burn out, and my body will let me know, and I'll just like absolutely crash for a day, be totally useless. And then I'm like, I'll be mad because I have all these things to do. And I'm like, no, this is my body telling me this is what I need today, and I have to listen to it. There's just you just have to take care of yourself.
I want to add one more thing, and it goes back to also something that we've also touched upon, which is like your identity as a scientist. And, you know, you're here, you want to pursue post-bac and prep because you're like, okay, I really, you know, I love research, right? So how do I get this degree and pursue it even further professionally? But I think a lot of us, like early on, I can speak like personally too, like I was just like so obsessed with it. I was like, okay, like I tied my self-worth to, you know, the failures or successes, right, in lab, the experiments. And so then that's like a big mistake that I did, because then it's like that's how I experienced burnout from the get-go upon entering grad school, because you're gonna fail a lot. And if you tie your identity to like just 100% science, then that's how you're going to burn out. And so I think it's really important to pursue hobbies outside of the lab. So, you know, photography, you know, running, you know, cooking, doing whatever. And so that's a huge thing. You're going to also have a lot of freedom in like grad school to like pursue other hobbies as well. So I think that's like, you know, one of the big ways to avoid that too, is remembering that you're not just, you know, who you are at the bench, it's outside of the lab. Mhm.
I would just like to add that as a post-bac student, you're in the perfect time to really like take advantage of figuring out a healthy balance between, you know, lab and doing schoolwork and stuff, and also like what your identity outside of science looks like as well. But I have some advice for some easy ways you can do that. What I did as a post-bac, I looked for student coalition groups that were at these universities, and I joined or reached out to the ones that spoke to me. So me personally, I care about science communication and accessibility for underrepresented minorities in science. So I joined the OHSU's Alliance for Diversity in Science and Engineering. And I've been a part of that organization, of course, different chapters since I moved and I'm now in New York, but I've been a part of that national organization for how many years are we? Like 5 years now. I had to think about that. Time is flying. But in general, it's a nice way to interact with, you know, students who are current grad students, and you can ask them for advice. They're very friendly. And it's also a way to, you know, like relax, have a fun environment, and get to know people, network. That's the best way, yeah, to network.
Should I take a shot at the next question? So what I think, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but oftentimes what people call a conventional post-bac, that's what pre-meds are doing. Pre-meds are doing post-bac programs where they pay a lot of money to then go take some very highly specialized classes to increase their chances of getting into med school. It's much more like a master's program, where I would say the prep programs and other post-bacs focused on PhD programs are all about getting research experience. It's all about the research. I'm not sure if Kristen, if that answers your question, Kristen, or you want to follow up on that?
And those post-bac programs for that are MD focused, which is not what we're here for today, but then the MD focused post-bac programs, you have to pay for them, versus the PhD focused, the PhD bound, right, post-bac programs or prep programs, you don't need to pay for it. You receive a stipend if accepted and you pursue the program. Yep. Awesome, Christian. Mhm. Awesome.
Yeah, remember there's a whole route for you here where we will pay you to do a postdoc, to go to graduate school, to do a postdoc, to go into industry or to go into the academy and be a professor somewhere. And you will never have to take out any loans for this. Now, we professors aren't rich. I mean, we're doing fine. I'm totally comfortable, but I'm not filthy rich. But I also never went into debt. You know, there was programs all the way along the ways. We pay you to go to graduate school.
Awesome. Okay. Any last words of like advice from both of you guys? Actually, from three of you guys, because Denisha, you also did a post-bac I'm just the only one who can't really speak experience. So you guys, you three.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of the post-bac program. At the time when I was in undergrad, I didn't have much guidance from my guidance counselors. And so I had only applied to one PhD program. And even though I had gotten an interview, I got waitlisted. So I did not know what to do next. And I had decent grades. I had some prior research experience, but I didn't have mentorship. And so the post-bac for me this was one of my early experiences where I had people who really invested in me and cared about my success and my future and what I wanted to do. And I said, my goal, I want to get into grad school. I want to be a researcher. And they were like, okay, let's help you get there. So I'm a fan of the post-bac program because I made a lot of great friends. I see them every year at SFN because I stayed in neuroscience. So I love that. I have a community of scientists who I still regularly talk to. And two, the mentorship was fantastic, not just from my PI. The lab I was in was amazing. I had a great experience there. My PI still writes me recommendation letters to this day for things that I apply to, but also our program director who ran the post-bac, she was fantastic, Dr. Letitia Wyatt. She really gave us some of the fundamental tools of like how to organize your notes, how to keep a lab book, how to conduct yourself in a lab setting, like things like that no one really teaches you explicitly as a first year graduate student. I learned in my post-bac. So I'm a fan of the post-bac because I think that one, it was a great introduction to what life as a grad student is like, because I mean, I was in lab, I had my own project, all that stuff. And two, the mentorship stuck with me for life. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I guess my words of advice and wisdom maybe are it's just that you have to be okay with being bad at something first to learn to be good at it. I think it's definitely a process. You're not gonna go into a program for 1 year and become a scientist, but you'll learn how the scientific enterprise works and how, you have to get negative data to get positive data and vice versa. So I think learning and really embracing that, that reality of the scientific process, that it's really hard to like gain peace with and just like be okay with that nature of the process. That's something that you can only get by exposing yourself to experiences and places that you've never seen before, and be open to learning. When I came to Case Western, we have more cryo-EM microscopes there than we did in my country in Puerto Rico. There's not even one microscope cryo-EM. And so I never knew what that was until I got there and I exposed myself to something new. So really be open to new experiences. And I think this is why I advocate so much for prep programs. So
awesome.
And I'd echo what you both all said. So some of you in the audience might be sitting there thinking, oh, am I good enough to go to a post-bac? And my answer is yes, and to give it a shot because we understand that, not most people don't have it all lined up and ready to go. And the whole point of the postdoc is to help push you over that hump to get you ready to succeed in graduate school. And I kind of wish every single PhD student could do a post-bac for a year first. That would be amazing. And so I think you'll just end up far better off in the end after doing this 1 year. So I'd say just go for it and give it a shot.
So yeah, all of you guys in the audience, go for it, give it a shot. A lot of the applications are due again February to April, I believe. So you guys still have a bit of time, and don't ever think you're not good enough, because as what Dan, Aníbal, Denisha have been echoing throughout the entire webinar, it's you guys are, as long as you have to drive, you want this, then you are good enough for a post-bac program. Like they need more post-bacs, right? And so yeah, and I think that concludes this webinar. And so thank you so much, Aníbal. Thank you so much, Dan, for your time. Y'all have been great, and Denisha for co-coordinating this with me. And yeah, and so this will also be like available on YouTube for anyone to like watch and refer to, and we'll also be linking the slides to people in the GSMI community.
And I think you can find me if you look for UC Davis Prep. You can always email me with questions. And all the prep directors and they're all willing to answer your questions. I mean, that's what we're here for. Ask us questions and by email, find us on the websites, we'll answer them.
Awesome. Yes. Okay, we'll also include that in the description box on our YouTube channel. Okay. And so with that, thank you everyone. Have a great weekend and happy holidays.
Happy holidays,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye everyone.